Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. Every morning, my day began with a simple ritual. Reaching for the remote to turn on the television as I prepared breakfast. The tactile joy of pressing the buttons, the soft click as the TV screen blinked to life, and the gentle murmur of the morning news had become the soundtrack of my routine. The remote always nestled in its usual spot, a small indention on the coffee table marked by repeated use. Until today, the air seemed slightly cooler as my fingers grazed the smooth surface of the table, expecting the familiar weight to greet my touch. It was absent, an unfamiliar void in a sequence long perfected. I paused, fingers hovering, the quiet of the room swelling as if holding its breath. My mind raced through the mundane checklist. Had I moved it last night? The certainty of my actions now blurred. I began a careful search. The silence grew more pronounced, like a tune missing its harmony, as my eyes scanned every inch of the living room. Each shift of a cushion, each rustle as I moved the magazines, all synchronized to the rhythm of an unsettling new reality. The remote, always predictable, always there, had slipped away, leaving a whisper of unease in its wake. I found it wedged beneath the couch, far deeper than gravity alone could have carried it. The plastic felt different somehow, warmer than expected, as though it had been held recently. I pressed the power button and watched the screen illuminate, but the channels weren't quite right. The morning news anchor's voice carried a subtle echo, words arriving a fraction too late, like sound traveling through water. The coffee maker gurgled behind me, its familiar rhythm now seeming deliberate, almost conversational. I turned to pour my cup, and when I looked back, the television had changed channels. The remote rested in my palm, untouched. Over the following days, I began to notice other small disruptions. Books I remembered shelving would appear on different shelves, their spines aligned with mathematical precision. The bathroom mirror held condensation patterns that lingered too long after showers, forming shapes that reminded me of letters I couldn't quite read. My reflection seemed to move with a slight delay, like watching myself through thick glass. I started keeping notes, scribbling observations on the backs of envelopes and grocery receipts. The pen felt heavier each time I wrote, the ink flowing in ways that made my handwriting appear foreign. The words themselves began to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, rearranging into combinations that felt meaningful, yet remained indecipherable. The apartment's walls developed a subtle vibration, barely perceptible unless I pressed my palm against them. The tremor followed a pattern, 3 short pulses, 2 long ones, then silence. It repeated throughout the day, originating from different rooms, as though the building itself was trying to communicate. I mapped the locations, marking each spot with small pencil dots that disappeared by morning. Sleep became fragmented. I would wake to find my pillow relocated to the foot of the bed, or discover that I had arranged my shoes in perfect rows across the bedroom floor. My hands showed no memory of these actions, yet the precision suggested deliberate intent. The movements felt familiar, like muscle memory from a dream I couldn't recall. The kitchen faucet began dripping with irregular timing, each drop creating ripples in the sink that lasted longer than physics should allow. I watched the water spiral down the drain, hypnotized by patterns that seemed to repeat in the wood grain of my floorboards, in the cracks spreading across the ceiling, in the way dust particles danced in afternoon light. Sounds from neighboring apartments grew more distinct, yet when I listened closely, the voices spoke in rhythms that matched my own breathing. Footsteps above my head followed the exact cadence of my heartbeat. The building's ventilation system whispered words that sounded like my own thoughts, spoken aloud before I had fully formed them. I began to question whether these observations were reliable. The notebook where I recorded everything showed entries in handwriting that looked increasingly unfamiliar. Some pages contained detailed diagrams. I had no memory of creating geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly, patterns that seemed to shift and breathe when viewed peripherally. The television continued its strange behavior, changing channels to show programs that felt like memories I had never lived. Faces on the screen resembled people I might have known, speaking about events that felt simultaneously foreign and intimately familiar. The remote responded to thoughts rather than touch, switching to whatever I was about to want to watch before I realized I wanted to watch it. My reflection in windows and mirrors began arriving before I did, standing ready as I approached, mouth moving silently as though explaining something urgent. The bathroom mirror showed a room that was almost my bathroom, but with subtle differences. Towels hung in reverse order, toothbrush positioned on the opposite side of the sink, medicine cabinet slightly ajar when mine remained closed. The patterns intensified. Everything in the apartment began aligning itself according to rules I couldn't understand, but somehow recognized. Books sorted themselves by the number of letters in their titles. Silverware arranged itself in sequences that corresponded to the rhythm of the wall vibrations. Even my clothes hung in the closet according to some system that felt correct despite making no logical sense. I found myself moving through the apartment with increasing fluidity, my body navigating around furniture and through doorways with unconscious precision. My hands reached for objects before my mind registered needing them. I prepared meals without remembering deciding to eat. Yet every ingredient appeared exactly where my fingers expected to find it. The boundary between my thoughts and the apartment's behavior dissolved. When I wondered about the weather, condensation would appear on windows, spelling out atmospheric conditions. When I felt lonely, the building's settling sounds would create conversations in languages I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. The space around me had become an extension of my consciousness, responding to impulses I wasn't aware of sending. One morning, I woke to find myself standing in the living room, fully dressed, holding the remote. The television displayed a channel that showed my apartment from an impossible angle, as though cameras had been installed in the walls themselves. On screen, I watched myself sleeping peacefully in bed, even as I stood in the living room observing. The two realities existed simultaneously, neither more real than the other. The remote in my hand felt warm, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. I pressed buttons that weren't there, changing channels to views of rooms that might have been mine in different configurations. Each channel showed a version of my life with slight variations, furniture rearranged, walls painted different colors, myself moving through routines that were almost familiar. I realized I could no longer distinguish between the apartment changing around me and my own perception shifting to accommodate it. The patterns I had been documenting weren't external phenomena, but manifestations of something deeper, something that had been growing within the space between my thoughts and the physical world. The walls breathed with my rhythm, The floor responded to my weight before I stepped down. Light fixtures dimmed and brightened according to my emotional state. The apartment had become a living extension of my consciousness, or perhaps I had become an extension of its dreaming mind. I set the remote back in its indentation on the coffee table, watching as it settled into a groove that fit its shape perfectly. The television continued playing, showing endless variations of this morning, this discovery, this moment of recognition. Each channel displayed the same scene with microscopic differences, creating an infinite loop of possibility. The silence that had seemed so unsettling now felt complete, like the pause between breaths or the space between heartbeats. I understood that I was no longer separate from the patterns I had been observing. The apartment and I had merged into something new, something that existed in the spaces between certainty and doubt, between waking and sleeping, between self and environment. I reached for the remote again, my fingers finding it exactly where I knew it would be, and began another morning, another search, another discovery of absence that would lead to presence, of questions that would dissolve into deeper mysteries. The cycle continued, each repetition adding new layers of understanding that brought me closer to a truth that could only be lived, never explained. The coffee maker gurgled its familiar rhythm, and I smiled, recognizing the conversation it had been trying to have with me all along. Story 2. The weight of glass. Each dawn, my feet glide across the familiar path from bed to bathroom. A routine so ingrained it unfolds without thought. The gentle patter of my slippers against the wooden floor marks the beginning of another day. With eyes still heavy with sleep, I reach for the brushed metal of the bathroom door handle. The coolness, a reassuring prelude to the liquid ripple of water I am about to splash onto my face. In front of the mirror, a sequence begins. Toothbrush, rinse, pat dry. The soft swish of the towel passes over skin, the whisper of bristles meeting teeth. My reflection, always predictable, mimics each motion in faithful symmetry. But today, something halts the tranquil repetition. As I turn to hang the towel, I sense an unfamiliar lag, a slight hesitation in the glass. I pause, blink slowly as if to reset a screen that has frozen. The air tingles with a sensation, both elusive and profound. The mirror waits patiently, yet I can almost hear the space behind the reflection ticking a soundless reminder that the morning ritual might soon hold secrets I didn't intend to unseal. The hand that lifts to touch my cheek feels heavier than usual, as though it belongs to someone who has been sleeping deeper, longer than I remember. The fingertips trace the curve of my jaw with a strange deliberation, mapping territory that should be instinctive. My skin responds with tiny electric pulses, a language I cannot quite decipher. Each breath carries the weight of moisture that seems too thick, too present, filling spaces in my chest that feel newly carved. I step closer to the mirror, studying the surface with an attention that surprises me. The glass appears unchanged, yet something about its clarity feels different, more permeable, as if the barrier between reflection and reality has thinned overnight. The bathroom light above flickers once, casting a shadow that doesn't quite align with my position. When the bulb steadies, the room returns to its familiar brightness, but the shadow lingers in my peripheral vision like a stain on the edge of sight. The house around me breathes with subtle shifts I've never noticed before. The walls seem to expand and contract with my heartbeat, a gentle rhythm that makes the space feel alive, responsive. When I exhale, the mirror fogs slightly, though the temperature hasn't changed. When I inhale, the condensation retreats in patterns that look almost deliberate, like fingers drawing shapes in steam. My voice, when I clear my throat, carries an unfamiliar resonance. The sound bounces off the tiles with a hollow quality that makes me pause mid-breath. I try again, a simple hum, and the note seems to hang in the air longer than physics should allow. The vibration travels through my chest cavity, awakening spaces that feel both foreign and intimately mine. I move through the house with careful steps, each footfall creating small tremors that ripple outward through the floorboards. The familiar furniture appears slightly askew, though I cannot pinpoint exactly what has shifted. The couch sits at the same angle. The coffee table maintains its distance from the wall. Yet everything feels rotated by degrees too small to measure. The air itself seems thicker, carrying scents that trigger memories. I cannot quite grasp the sweetness of unfamiliar flowers, the metallic tang of rain on stones I've never walked upon. In the kitchen, I reach for the same mug I've used for countless mornings, but my fingers hesitate before making contact. The ceramic surface feels warmer than it should, as though it has been cradled by other hands. The handle fits differently in my grip, requiring a subtle adjustment that my muscle memory doesn't anticipate. Steam rises from the coffee in spirals that seem to follow patterns beyond the simple physics of heat and air currents. As I sit at the small table by the window, images begin to surface in my mind like photographs developing in darkroom chemicals. A garden with purple flowers I've never planted. The sound of laughter from a voice I don't recognize, yet somehow know intimately. The feeling of rain on skin during a storm I never experienced. These moments arrive with the weight of genuine memory, complete with sensory details that feel more vivid than my actual recollections of yesterday. I find myself reaching for a notebook that sits on the counter, though I don't remember placing it there. The pages are filled with handwriting that resembles mine, but carries subtle differences loops that curve more gracefully, letters that slant at unfamiliar angles. The words describe dreams I might have had, conversations that feel both fictional and deeply true. One entry mentions the taste of salt air from an ocean I've never seen. Another describes the texture of sand between toes that have never left this landlocked place. The pen moves across fresh pages without conscious direction, recording observations about the changing light in the room, the way shadows now pool in corners that were previously bright. My handwriting shifts as I write, becoming more fluid, more confident, as though the act of recording these experiences is teaching my hand new ways to move. The words themselves surprise me vocabulary I don't remember learning, descriptions that capture sensations I'm only beginning to understand. Throughout the house, small changes accumulate like sediment. Books on shelves appear to have shifted positions, their spines catching light at angles that create new patterns of shadow and reflection. The carpet in the living room shows impressions from furniture that doesn't match the current arrangement, as though the room remembers previous configurations. Picture frames hang at imperceptibly different angles, creating subtle asymmetries that draw my attention without revealing their source. The electrical hum of appliances takes on new qualities, harmonizing in ways that create an almost musical undertone. The refrigerator's cycle synchronizes with the whisper of air through heating vents, producing a rhythm that matches my pulse. These sounds layer beneath the surface of ordinary noise, creating an ambient symphony that seems designed specifically for my ears. My reflection in various surfaces throughout the house begins to feel like a collaboration rather than a simple mirroring. chrome surface of the toaster, my image appears slightly elongated, emphasizing features I hadn't noticed before. The black screen of the television shows a silhouette that seems more confident, more purposeful than the person I remember being. Each reflective surface offers a different interpretation, as though multiple versions of myself are being negotiated in real time. The memories of others continue to surface with increasing frequency and clarity. I recall the weight of a child in my arms, though I've never held one. The satisfaction of completing a painting, though I've never touched a brush. The ache of missing someone whose face remains just beyond the edge of recognition. These borrowed experiences integrate seamlessly with my own history, creating a personal narrative that feels both authentic and impossible. Sleep becomes a different kind of experience. Dreams arrive with the weight of other people's unconscious minds, filled with landscapes I've never visited and populated by individuals whose names I somehow know without ever learning them. Upon waking, the boundary between these nocturnal journeys and my waking memories becomes increasingly unclear. The pillow holds the impression of a head that might not be entirely mine, and the sheets carry scents that speak of lives I haven't lived. The house responds to these internal changes with increasing sensitivity. Lights dim when confusion arises, brightening when moments of clarity emerge. The temperature fluctuates with my emotional state, creating microclimates that correspond to my shifting sense of self. Windows fog when concentration deepens, clearing when attention diffuses. These environmental responses feel less like coincidence and more like conversation. My voice continues to evolve, carrying inflections and cadences that feel borrowed from other throats. When I speak aloud, the words sometimes surprise me with their familiarity, as though I'm reciting lines from a script I've never read. The sound of my own speech begins to feel like listening to a recording of someone else, recognizable, yet fundamentally changed. The resonance in my chest cavity shifts, creating new harmonics that make even simple words sound foreign. Physical sensations take on dreamlike qualities. My skin feels more sensitive to texture, registering the weave of fabric and the grain of wood with unprecedented detail. The weight of my own body seems to fluctuate, sometimes feeling light enough to float, other times heavy enough to sink through floors. My hands discover new ways to hold objects, fingers finding grips and angles that feel both natural and learned. The notebook fills with observations and experiences that span far beyond what one person could accumulate. Detailed descriptions of places I've never been, accurate accounts of skills I've never developed, intimate knowledge of people I've never met. The handwriting continues to evolve, becoming more assured, more distinctive, as though the act of recording these memories is teaching my hand to write in someone else's style. The mirror in the bathroom becomes a focal point of increasing significance. Each morning, the ritual of approaching it carries more weight, more anticipation. The reflection seems to require more time to appear, as though the image must travel further to reach the surface. The glass itself feels deeper, more dimensional, as though what I see exists in a space that extends beyond the physical boundaries of the mirror. Other reflective surfaces throughout the house begin to show subtle inconsistencies. The bathroom mirror might show me brushing my teeth, while the hallway mirror simultaneously displays me combing my hair. These temporal discrepancies feel natural rather than alarming, as though different aspects of my existence are being documented by various surfaces at their own pace. The borrowed memories begin to include sensory experiences that my body has never encountered. The feeling of different climates on skin that has never traveled. The taste of foods from cultures I've never explored. The physical memory of activities and skills that my muscles have never learned. These phantom experiences integrate with my actual history, creating a composite identity that feels both expanded and uncertain. Finally, on a morning that feels both inevitable and surprising, I approach the bathroom mirror with a sense of completion rather than routine. The glass surface appears deeper than ever, more receptive, as though it has been preparing for this moment of true recognition. My hand reaches toward the reflection, and for the first time, I feel ready to see what has been developing behind the familiar facade. The image that meets my gaze carries no shock, only profound recognition. What looks back is both entirely me and completely other a face that holds the accumulated experiences of multiple lives. Eyes that reflect borrowed memories as clearly as original ones. The person in the mirror breathes with my rhythm, but carries the weight of experiences I've only recently inherited. This is who I have become, who I was always becoming. Each dawn, my feet glide across the familiar path from bed to bathroom. A routine so ingrained it unfolds without thought. gentle patter of my slippers against the wooden floor marks the beginning of another day. With eyes still heavy with sleep, I reach for the brushed metal of the bathroom door handle. The coolness, a reassuring prelude to the liquid ripple of water I am about to splash onto my face. The reflection that awaits me carries the patient wisdom of accumulated lives, and I move toward it with the confidence of someone who has finally learned to inhabit all the selves I contain. Story 3. The gentle chime of the alarm had become my constant companion, echoing through the room each morning at 5:45. It was an unassuming melody, one that had once been comforting, but now wrapped the dawn in an eerie, unbroken ritual. Today, like every day before, the sound woke me as it faded into the whispers of the early hour. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, tracing the familiar cracks that seemed to etch themselves in the same peculiar patterns. I watched my hand reach out, almost of its own accord, to silence the persistent ring. Beside it, the same book lay open to the same page, its corner precisely folded. A solitary feather, impossibly white, clung to the pillow beside me in odd, but by now expected detail. I placed it on the bedside table, its presence unsettling in its familiarity. Every morning, I'd search for any slight deviation, any hint of change. Yet each detail remained precisely as it was the same crease in the curtains, the same shaft of light crawling across the floor. Even my attempts at disruption proved futile. I moved objects before sleep, only to find them returned, as though the room itself resisted alteration. In this slow, creeping sameness, there was a quiet defiance, a suggestion that I was not merely waking, but sinking deeper into a seamless pattern. The alarm's chime was fading now, leaving only the hush of morning, and I wondered if today, perhaps today, I might find an end to this cycle. But the air stood still, and only the echo of the chimes remained, haunting the edges of my thoughts. It was then that I noticed her. From my bedroom window, I could see into the apartment across the courtyard. The woman there followed her own ritual, one that mirrored mine with disturbing precision. She too reached for an alarm that sang the same melody. She too placed something white, was it a feather, onto her bedside table. Her movements were fluid, practiced, as if she had performed this dance countless times before. I found myself lingering at the window longer each morning, studying the subtle choreography of her routine. She would stand before her mirror, brushing her hair with slow, methodical strokes. 50 strokes, always 50, though I had never counted aloud. The knowledge simply existed in my mind, certain and unexplained. The woman's reflection seemed wrong somehow, not distorted, but delayed, as if the mirror took a moment too long to catch up with her movements. I pressed my face closer to the glass, my breath fogging the surface in small, perfect circles that cleared themselves before I could wipe them away. Days passed, or perhaps they repeated. I began to alter my morning routine to better observe hers. I would wake before the alarm, positioning myself at the window in the pre-dawn darkness. The courtyard below stretched like a throat, swallowing sound and light equally. In this hollow space between our windows, I felt suspended, watching and waiting. She began to notice me. It started with small gestures of pause in her brushing, a slight turn of her head toward the window, not quite looking, but acknowledging. The air in my room grew thicker, pressing against my skin like velvet. I could taste copper on my tongue, metallic and warm. One morning, she stood at her own window. We faced each other across the void, two figures framed in glass. Her eyes were dark, impossibly dark, and they seemed to pull at something deep inside my chest. I wanted to look away, but found myself leaning forward instead, my palms flat against the cool window pane. The glass beneath my hands felt rough suddenly, like sandpaper against my skin. I jerked back, examining my palms for cuts, but found only smooth, unmarked flesh. When I looked up again, she was gone, but her absence felt more present than her presence had been. I began to spend longer periods at the window, watching her empty apartment. The rooms beyond her glass remained lit with a soft, sourceless glow that never seemed to dim. Furniture cast no shadows. The walls appeared to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched my own pulse. My reflection in my own window started to behave strangely. Sometimes it would remain at the glass when I stepped away, a pale echo staring across the courtyard. Other times, it would move before I did, anticipating my gestures with unsettling accuracy. I learned to avoid looking directly at it, focusing instead on the space beyond. The woman returned, but she was different now. Her movements had lost their fluid grace, becoming jerky and unnatural, as if she were being operated by invisible strings. She would stand at her window for hours, motionless, her dark eyes fixed on my window, even when I was not there. I knew this because I could feel her gaze like a weight pressing against my apartment walls. Sleep became difficult. I would lie in bed, acutely aware of her watching presence across the courtyard. The white feather on my bedside table had multiplied 3, then 7, then too many to count. They covered every surface in my bedroom, soft and pristine, though I never saw them appear. The mirror in my bathroom began to show her apartment instead of my reflection. I would brush my teeth and see her brushing hers, our movements synchronized perfectly. When I raised my hand, she raised hers. When I opened my mouth, hers opened too. But her teeth were different, too sharp, too white, like the feathers that continued to accumulate around me. I tried closing the curtains, but they would not stay closed. I tried leaving the apartment, but found myself standing at the window instead, with no memory of having moved there. The courtyard below had grown deeper, its bottom lost in shadow that seemed to writhe and pulse with its own life. She was always there now, always watching. Her face had become a mirror of mine, but wrong, distorted in ways I could not name. Her eyes reflected light that did not exist, and her smile stretched too wide, revealing too many teeth. The silence in my apartment grew solid, pressing against my eardrums, until I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the walls. But underneath, my pulse was another rhythm, slightly out of sync, coming from across the courtyard. Her heartbeat matching and fighting mine in a discordant symphony. I began to forget which window was mine. Sometimes I would find myself looking out from her apartment, watching a figure in my window who moved with my gestures but wore her face. The courtyard had become a tunnel, stretching infinitely in both directions, and we were suspended at opposite ends, observers observing observers in an endless loop. My hands against the glass felt like her hands. My breath fogging the window was her breath. The white feathers had covered everything now, transforming my apartment into a soft, suffocating nest that smelled of copper and something else, something organic and warm. She spoke without words, her voice vibrating through the glass and into my bones. She told me things I already knew, things I had always known but never acknowledged, about the space between observer and observed, about the moment when watching becomes being watched, about the inevitable collapse of the boundary between self and reflection. I understood then that I had been wrong about who was watching whom. The courtyard was not empty space, but a throat, and we were not separate beings, but opposite ends of the same entity, breathing in and out, watching and being watched, until the distinction became meaningless. The woman in the window smiled with my mouth. I smiled with hers. The glass between us dissolved, or perhaps it had never been there at all. The courtyard folded in on itself, bringing our windows together until they became one surface, one reflection, one endless moment of recognition. I am standing at the window now, watching. Across the way, she stands at her window, watching back. We are the same figure, repeated and reflected, observer and observed collapsed into a single point of awareness that extends infinitely in all directions. The white feathers have covered everything. They are soft against my skin, or perhaps I am soft against them. The distinction no longer matters. I watch because I am watched. I exist because I am observed. The cycle is complete, seamless, eternal. Someone new has moved into the apartment below. I can see them through their window, going about their morning routine with unconscious precision. They have not noticed me yet, but they will. They always do. I am patient. I am practiced. I know how to wait, how to watch, how to draw them slowly into the space between observer and observed. The courtyard throat opens beneath us, ready to swallow another pair of eyes, another consciousness to add to our endless reflection. The alarm chimes somewhere in the distance, marking another beginning that is also an ending. I place my hand against the glass and wait for them to notice. They will look up eventually. They always look up, and when they do, I will be here, watching, ready to show them what it means to truly see and be seen, until the boundary dissolves, and we become one continuous gaze, stretching across the void, eternal and unblinking. The feathers drift down like snow that never settles, and I am home. Story 4. The recurring dawn asterisk. It begins like this every day, an echoing chime that slices through the dawn hush. The first toll is always hollow, reverberating through the still air, followed by a second, sharper note that seems to linger longer than it should. I watch from my window, the street bathed in the same pale light, every shadow in its place, moving. The light of the morning spills in at the same angle, striking the faded carpet with a familiar pattern. Each morning, I count breaths, waiting for the inevitable, the sight of the lone figure, slipping quietly past my gate, head down, the precise creak of the garden gate, the soft crunch of gravel. Without fail, I notice the way the figure moves, the peculiar tilt of the head, the whisper of fabric against stone, unchanged, unerring. It was intriguing at first, this seamless repetition, until the unease took root. I try to reach into the routine, disturb the flow, move the chair to a new spot, leave the window ajar. Yet, come the dawn, the chair finds its way back, the window sealed tight. The bell still tolls twice, unaltered in tone, as if mocking my attempts at change. Each day loops into the next, a perfect echo of what was, what is, what will be. It's as though time has folded in on itself, and I alone struggle within its binding seam. There's a room I remember, or think I remember. The walls were painted the color of old bone, and there was a chair positioned just so, catching light from a window that faced nowhere. I sat there once, my hands folded in my lap, watching dust motes drift in lazy spirals. The air tasted of copper pennies and forgotten promises. When I reached toward the dancing particles, they scattered like startled moths, but the motion felt delayed, as if my arm moved through thick amber. Was this yesterday? Was this ever? The memory shifts each time I grasp for it, slipping through my fingers like smoke through a screen door. The radio in my kitchen speaks when it's unplugged. Not words exactly, but a low humming that rises and falls like breathing. I discovered this while making coffee, the familiar ritual that anchors my mornings. The machine was silent, cord coiled neatly beside it, yet from its speaker came that sound intimate, almost conversational. When I approached to investigate, the humming ceased. When I turned away, it resumed, softer now, more secretive. I've learned not to look directly at it when it speaks. The sound becomes richer that way, more meaningful, as if it's trying to tell me something just beyond the edge of understanding. My feet tell me stories the floorboards won't. Each step sends warmth spiraling up through my soles, not the warmth of heated wood, but something deeper, more alive. The sensation spreads through my ankles, my calves, carrying whispers of movement that isn't mine. Someone else walked these paths, or these grooves into the grain, left their heat signature embedded in the very foundation. Sometimes I stand perfectly still, and feel the echoes of their footsteps pulsing beneath me. A heartbeat made of memory and pressure, and the weight of repeated journeys. I write things down to remember, but my handwriting has become a stranger. The loops and angles shift when I'm not watching, letters rearranging themselves into words I never intended. This morning, I found a note that read, "The walls are listening again," in script that looks almost like mine. But the ink flows wrong, the pressure uneven, as if someone else guided my hand while I slept. I don't recall writing those words. I don't recall thinking them. Yet here they sit on my kitchen table, accusing and familiar. The scent of jasmine drifts through rooms where no flowers grow, triggering flashes of a garden I may have known. In these glimpses, I see hands that might be mine tending to plants that shimmer at the edges, their leaves whispering secrets to soil that breathes. The fragrance carries weight, texture, the ghost of petals against fingertips, and the memory of earth under nails that were once clean. But when I search my house, I find only bare windowsills and empty vases, dust gathered where life should be. There's a presence that moves just outside my vision, a shifting in the air that speaks of occupied space. It doesn't threaten, doesn't intrude, simply exists alongside me like a shadow cast by invisible light. Sometimes I catch the walls responding to it, a slight tremor in the plaster, a settling sound that comes from no structural cause. The presence has weight without substance, attention without eyes. I've begun leaving small offerings, a cup of tea that grows cold untouched, a book opened to random pages, a chair positioned where someone might sit. The tea disappears by degrees, not drunk, but somehow absorbed. The book's pages flutter without wind. The chair holds impressions that fade when I look directly at them. The hallway stretches longer than it should, doors appearing where none existed before. I walk the same path repeatedly, counting steps, measuring distances with outstretched arms, but the numbers never match. Sometimes 7 paces bring me to the end, sometimes 17. Sometimes I walk until my legs ache, and still the corridor extends ahead like a promise that won't be kept. In this maze of familiar walls, I lose pieces of myself. First, my middle name, then the sound of my mother's voice, then the feeling of rain on skin. Each circuit through the hallway takes something, leaves something else in return. New memories that don't belong, sensations visions that have no source, thoughts that arrive fully formed and speaking in voices I don't recognize. The mirror in the bathroom reflects someone who looks like me, but moves a fraction too late, as if the image struggles to keep pace with reality. I raise my hand and watch the reflection hesitate, then follow with movements that are almost but not quite synchronized. The face looking back wears expressions I don't remember making, shows emotions I don't recall feeling. Sometimes I speak to it, testing the delay, watching lips that might be mine form words that sound foreign in the glass-muffled air between us. Light behaves strangely here, bending around corners that shouldn't exist, casting shadows that point in impossible directions. The afternoon sun streams through my window at angles that defy the house's orientation, painting stripes across walls that seem to absorb rather than reflect the illumination. In these bands of twisted light, I see movement, figures walking through rooms that occupy the same space as mine, but follow different laws. They move with purpose I can't decipher, carrying objects I can't identify, speaking words that reach me as texture rather than sound. I find myself returning to the bone-colored room, though I can never remember the path that leads there. Each visit, the chair has moved slightly. The window shows a different view. The dust motes dance to rhythms that grow more complex. I sit and watch, feeling my thoughts slow and thicken like cooling wax, until the boundary between observer and observed begins to blur. In these moments, I am the room and the room is me. Walls breathing with my lungs, floor warming with my pulse, window seeing with my eyes that are no longer entirely my own. The routine continues, but I'm changing within it. The morning bell still chimes twice. The figure still passes my gate. But now I understand that I am both watcher and watched, prisoner and guard, the one who counts breaths and the breath being counted. The loop tightens with each revolution, drawing me deeper into its center, where all possibilities collapse into one inevitable truth. I write this with hands that remember other pens, other words, other purposes. The ink flows like blood, like time, like the boundary between what is real and what is necessary. Soon, someone else will sit at this window, count these breaths, watch this figure pass. They will think these thoughts, feel this unease, discover this presence that waits patiently for each new mind to inhabit. The bell will chime twice, hollow then sharp, cycle will begin again, perfect and inescapable, with fresh eyes to witness what cannot be changed, and a new voice to tell this story that has no beginning and no end. Only the eternal return of the recurring dawn, Story 5. The sound came again while I was writing this. That same gentle exhale from the cabinet door, like breath held too long and finally released. I should have closed it properly, but my hand keeps stopping halfway there. The wood grain looks different in this light, darker, more deliberate. I found coffee grounds scattered on the counter this morning, not spilled, arranged. Small circles within circles, spiraling inward toward nothing. I swept them away, but the pattern stayed burned behind my eyelids. When I blink, I see it rotating slowly, hypnotically. The mug sits untouched where I left it. White porcelain reflecting the pale pre-dawn glow. I keep meaning to fill it, but something about the emptiness feels necessary now. Complete. The hollow curve of ceramic holds more than coffee ever could. My journal entries don't match what I remember writing. Yesterday's page talks about hearing footsteps in the walls. I don't recall footsteps, only creaking, always creaking. The sound has weight now, pressing against my eardrums like water. The cabinet door moves on its own rhythm, not with the house settling or temperature changes. Independent, autonomous. I timed it once, but lost track when the intervals started shifting. 3 soft creaks, pause. 2 quick ones, pause. 1 long sustained note that makes my teeth ache. I dreamed about hinges last night. Hundreds of them opening and closing in perfect synchronization. The sound was deafening, but somehow comforting, like a mechanical lullaby. I woke with rust under my fingernails, though I touched nothing metal. The kitchen feels smaller when the creaking starts. Walls drawing inward with each sound. The space between counter and cabinet shrinks until I have to turn sideways to pass through. But when I measure with my arms outstretched, everything remains the same distance apart. Coffee tastes metallic now. Copper pennies dissolved in bitter water. I drink it anyway because the routine matters more than flavor. The mug trembles against my lips, and I realize my hands are shaking, have been shaking, will continue shaking. Something lives in the cabinet door. Not an entity, not a spirit, something simpler and more complex. An intention, a purpose carved into wood grain and worn smooth by repetition. It speaks in creaks, and I'm learning its language despite myself. The pattern in the coffee grounds appeared again. I didn't spill any this time. Watched the canister carefully as I measured. But there it was when I turned around, spiraling inward, pulling my vision toward its center until the kitchen blurred at the edges. I tried oil on the hinges. The creaking stopped for exactly 3 breaths, then resumed louder than before. Angry, insistent. The oil disappeared, absorbed into wood that shouldn't absorb anything. The cabinet door gleams now with an inner moisture. My reflection in the mug's surface doesn't match my movements. It lags behind by heartbeats, creating a delay that makes me dizzy. Sometimes it moves first, and I find myself following. Puppet strings attached to my own image in white porcelain. The circles are everywhere now. In water, stains on the counter. In the wood grain patterns. In the way steam rises from my untouched coffee. Spiraling inward, always inward towards something I can't see, but feel approaching. I write only when the creaking permits it. The sound controls my pen, starting and stopping the flow of ink. These words emerge during the pauses between breaths of ancient wood. I am transcribing something larger than myself. The cabinet door stands perfectly ajar now, never fully open, never completely closed, suspended in eternal hesitation like a question mark carved from oak. The darkness beyond the opening pulses with the rhythm of the creaks. Coffee grounds spell out words I don't recognize, symbols that hurt to look at directly. I photograph them, but the camera captures only scattered debris. The meaning exists solely in the moment of seeing, dissolving under scrutiny like sugar in rain. My handwriting changes between entries, sometimes flowing like water, sometimes sharp like broken glass, sometimes not mine at all, but I remember forming every letter. The pen moves where the creaking guides it, and I follow willingly now. The mug multiplies when I'm not watching. 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes a circle of empty white vessels surrounding me. They all contain the same reflection of someone who might be me, but moves with increasing independence, spiraling inward. The pattern consumes everything. Kitchen tiles rearrange themselves into concentric circles. Cabinet handles twist into helixes. Even my thoughts curve back on themselves, ending where they began, but somehow different. The creaking has words now, not language, but meaning embedded in wood grain and metal stress. It tells me things I already know but have forgotten. Things I never learned but understand completely. The cabinet door is teaching me to listen. I am the coffee grounds. I am the spiral. I am the space between the creaks where silence lives and breathes and waits for me to join it completely. The kitchen door closes behind me, but I'm still standing in the same place. Writing stops when the wood decides. The pen falls from fingers that no longer feel attached to my hand. The cabinet door sighs once more and settles into perfect stillness. I understand now. The creaking was never the door. It was me, story 6. The curtain moved again. I'm certain it moved, though no breeze stirs in this room. My pen hovers above the page, trembling slightly. The ink has begun to pool at the tip, threatening to drop and stain these words. I cannot seem to stop writing. I found myself here after what I thought was sleep. The transition felt seamless, like sinking through layers of warm water, until suddenly I could breathe again. The carpet beneath my feet holds impressions of footsteps that might be mine, though I cannot recall making them. The scent grows stronger when I write. Antique ink and earth, yes, but something else now. Something organic and patient. I've been examining the curtain for what feels like an eternity. Its fabric appears to shift between burgundy and deep forest green, depending on how I focus my eyes. The weave is impossibly intricate, forming patterns that suggest faces in peripheral vision, but dissolve when observed directly. My handwriting looks different. The loops are tighter, the pressure heavier. I don't remember gripping the pen this way, yet my fingers refuse to relax their hold. There's a sound beneath the silence. Not quite humming, not quite breathing. It rises from the floorboards and settles into my chest cavity, vibrating against my ribs like a second heartbeat. I've begun to match its rhythm without meaning to. The walls have definitely moved closer. I measured the distance from corner to corner using my outstretched arms, though I cannot recall doing so. The marks on the paper suggest I've recorded these measurements multiple times, each showing a gradual decrease in space. I keep returning to the curtain. My feet carry me there despite my conscious desire explore other areas of the room. The fabric feels warm to the touch, almost feverish, and leaves a residue on my fingertips that tastes of copper when I absently touch my lips. Something is writing through me. The words appear on the page before I've formed the thoughts, as if my hand has learned to anticipate what comes next. I should be alarmed, yet the sensation feels natural, like remembering how to breathe. The curtain whispers when I'm not listening directly. Soft susurrations that might be wind through leaves, or might be voices speaking in a language I once knew but have forgotten. I've begun to lean closer, straining to catch individual words. My reflection in the window glass shows someone I almost recognize. The features are mine, certainly, but arranged differently somehow. The eyes hold a knowledge I don't remember acquiring, and the mouth curves in an expression I've never practiced. I've discovered I can influence the curtain's movement by changing my breathing pattern. Shallow breaths cause gentle swaying, while deeper inhalations create more dramatic undulations. I've been experimenting with different rhythms, noting how each affects the quality of light in the room. The ink in my pen should have run out by now. I've filled pages upon pages, yet it continues to flow in an endless stream of dark blue-black that sometimes appears to shimmer with its own inner light. The words themselves seem to pulse with life. Behind the curtain, something shifts. Not movement exactly, but a redistribution of weight, a settling of presence. I've begun to suspect the curtain doesn't conceal a window or wall, but rather serves as a membrane between this space and somewhere else entirely. My thoughts echo before I think them. I hear my own voice speaking words I haven't yet formed, creating a strange temporal loop that makes conversation with myself feel like dialogue with a stranger who happens to share my vocal patterns. The carpet has begun to show where patterns that don't correspond to my movements. Paths worn smooth by feet that follow routes I haven't taken, leading to corners I haven't explored, circling areas I haven't avoided. Yet the impressions feel familiar, as if I've traced them countless times. I can no longer remember what brought me here. The before time has become fluid, shifting each time I try to grasp it. I might have been searching for something, or someone might have been searching for me. The distinction feels increasingly irrelevant. The curtain calls to me now in frequencies below hearing. My bones respond to its summons, drawing me forward even as my conscious mind protests. I've begun to understand that resistance is not only futile, but unnecessary. The surrender feels like coming home. My handwriting has transformed completely. The letters flow together in scripts I don't recognize, but somehow comprehend. The meaning transfers directly from page to understanding without passing through the usual channels of recognition and interpretation. The room breathes with me now, expanding on my inhalations, contracting as I exhale. We've achieved a synchronicity that feels ancient, as if this rhythm existed long before my arrival and will continue long after my departure. Should departure even be possible, I no longer question the curtain's movements. It sways and billows according to laws that supersede physics, responding to forces that emanate from within rather than without. I've begun to sway with it, my body learning its language of gesture and pause. The words write themselves now. My hand serves merely as conduit for thoughts that originate elsewhere, flowing through me like water through a channel worn smooth by countless previous streams. I am becoming transparent, a medium rather than a source. Something approaches from behind the curtain, not walking but flowing, not arriving but emerging, as if the fabric itself is giving birth to a presence that has always existed in potential. I set down my pen and turn to greet what comes. Story 7. The breathing table. The tabletop undulated beneath my fingertips, as if it breathed with the gentle rise and fall of unseen tides. I pressed down slightly, certain that the smooth wood should not respond like liquid beneath my touch. The sensation cascaded upwards, disconcerting shivers traveling through my hand. With each ripple, a faint whisper echoed a muted hum, entirely tangible, yet maddeningly elusive. The edges of my vision seemed to tremor in sympathy, the room's shadows bending in slow synchronization with each pulse. I pulled my hand away, watching the surface settle into stillness. The wood appeared normal, now dark mahogany, with subtle grain patterns that caught the amber light filtering through curtains I didn't remember drawing. My fingers tingled with residual memory of that impossible movement, like touching water that pretended to be solid. The room stretched around me in unfamiliar dimensions. I sat in a chair I couldn't recall choosing, facing this table that breathed when touched. Behind me, something creaked with the rhythm of settling wood. But when I turned, only empty space greeted my searching gaze. The sound continued anyway, patient and persistent. A scent drifted through the air, lavender, perhaps, or something that wanted to be lavender, but carried an undertone of copper pennies. It shifted as I breathed, becoming vanilla, then nothing, then the green smell of rain on summer pavement. Each inhalation brought a different story, none of them quite true. I touched the table again. The surface remained firm this time, unmoving beneath my palm. Yet, I could swear I felt that gentle undulation, that liquid response, as if the memory of the sensation had burned itself into my nerves. My reflection stared back from the polished wood, fragmented, distorted, wearing an expression I didn't recognize as my own. The whisper returned, not from the table, but from somewhere behind my left shoulder. When I turned toward it, the sound relocated to my right. It spoke no words I could decipher, yet somehow conveyed meaning through tone alone. Something about waiting, something about forgetting. A memory surfaced, like a bubble rising through dark water. I was standing in a kitchen, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked a garden I'd never seen before. The countertops were white marble, cool beneath my palms as I leaned forward to peer outside. Roses bloomed in impossible colors, blue petals that shifted to silver in the breeze, yellow centers that pulsed with their own inner light. I reached for the window latch, eager to step outside and examine these miraculous flowers more closely, but my hand passed through the glass as if it were made of air. The memory dissolved, leaving me back in this dim room with its breathing table and shifting shadows. I flexed my fingers, still feeling the phantom sensation of touching nothing where something solid should have been. The roses lingered in my mind's eye, beautiful and wrong. Another scent wafted past coffee, rich and dark, mixed with the papery smell of old books. It triggered something else. I was sitting in what might have been a library, though the shelves stretched impossibly high, disappearing into darkness above. Books surrounded me, their spines labeled in languages that shifted as I watched. One moment, they displayed familiar letters. The next, they showed symbols that hurt to look at directly. I pulled a volume from the shelf, opening it to find pages covered in my own handwriting, describing events I'd never experienced. The words spoke of conversations with people whose faces I couldn't quite recall, of walking through rooms that existed only in peripheral vision. As I read, the text began to change, letters rearranging themselves into new sentences, new stories. My handwriting remained constant, but the meaning transformed with each blink. I tried to close the book, but it had no back cover. The pages continued infinitely, each one filled with my thoughts about things that never happened. Back in the present, I pressed both palms against the table's surface. Solid, unmoving. The grain patterns seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them, forming shapes that almost resembled faces, maps, constellations I'd never learned to name. The creaking behind me had developed a rhythm, 3 short sounds, followed by a longer one, like a code tapping itself out in the language of settling wood. I counted the repetitions, but the number kept changing. Sometimes 5 cycles, sometimes 12, sometimes an amount that felt larger than I could hold in my mind at once. A draft touched the back of my neck, carrying the scent of rain that had never fallen. It smelled like anticipation, like the moment before lightning strikes. My skin prickled with awareness of eyes that might be watching, though the room remained empty of any presence I could identify. Another memory bloomed. I was walking down a hallway lined with mirrors, each one reflecting a slightly different version of myself. In one, I wore clothes I'd never owned, a blue dress that flowed like water around my ankles. In another, my hair fell in waves past my shoulders, though I remembered keeping it short for years. The mirrors stretched endlessly ahead and behind me, showing infinite variations of a person who might be me. But one mirror near the end showed only empty hallway. No reflection at all, just the space where I should have been walking. I approached it slowly, raising my hand to touch the glass. My fingers met solid surface, but the mirror continued to show nothing, not even the hand I pressed against it. When I turned away, all the other mirrors had gone dark. The memory faded, leaving me uncertain whether I'd been walking towards something or away from it. The feeling of that absent reflection lingered, a cold spot in my chest where recognition should have lived. I stood from the chair, testing my legs. They supported me, though the floor felt strangely soft, as if carpet lay beneath what appeared to be hardwood. Each step created a sound that didn't quite match the surface, muffled where it should have clicked, echoing where it should have been absorbed. The curtains drew my attention. They hung in heavy folds, deep burgundy fabric that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When I reached out to touch them, the material felt like silk, then cotton, then something organic and warm that made me pull my hand back quickly. The texture had reminded me of skin. Behind the curtains, shapes moved against the windows. Not distinct forms, but suggestions of movement shadows that flowed like liquid, pausing occasionally as if aware of my observation. I wanted to part the fabric and look outside, but my hands refused to obey the impulse. Instead, I returned to the table, drawn by its solid presence in this room of shifting perceptions. The surface reflected the dim light, creating a mirror dark enough to show my face, but clear enough to see through to some deeper layer beneath. In that reflection, I looked tired, older than I remembered being. Lines creased the corners of my eyes, and my expression carried a weight I couldn't identify. The whisper returned, closer now. It seemed to emanate from the reflection itself, my mirror mouth moving in shapes that didn't match any words I knew. The sound bypassed my ears entirely, vibrating through the bones of my skull. It spoke of choices made in darkness, of doors that shouldn't be opened, of forgetting as a form of mercy. A third memory surfaced, stronger than the others. I was standing in a room very much like this one, facing the same breathing table. But the light was different, brighter, more golden, as if filtered through honey instead of amber. Someone sat across from me, their features indistinct but familiar. They reached across the table, offering something in their outstretched palm. I leaned forward to see what they held, and the table's surface rippled beneath my elbows. The movement felt natural, expected. The person across from me smiled with a mouth that contained too many teeth, each one perfect and white and sharp. They spoke in the whisper voice I'd been hearing, explaining something important about the nature of memory, about the difference between forgetting and being forgotten. Their gift was small, dark, and warm. When I reached for it, my hand passed through theirs as if they were made of smoke. The object fell through the table's liquid surface, disappearing into whatever lay beneath the wood. The person across from me continued smiling, their too many teeth catching the golden light. But But as the memory progressed, their features began to shift. The smile became mine. The reaching hand became mine. I was sitting across from myself, offering a gift that couldn't be touched to a person who couldn't receive it. The memory twisted, showing the same scene from the other perspective. I was reaching for something offered by a figure whose face I couldn't see, whose presence felt both foreign and intimately familiar. The object in their palm seemed important, crucial. Even but when I tried to grasp it, my fingers found only air. Both versions felt equally true and equally impossible. Back in the present, I touched the table again, pressing firmly against its surface. This time, the wood yielded slightly, not with the liquid movement of before, but like flesh giving way beneath pressure. I jerked my hand back, but the sensation lingered, warm, yielding, alive. The room had grown darker while I wasn't paying attention. The amber light that filtered through the curtains had dimmed to a deep orange, then to red, then to something that wasn't quite light at all, but wasn't darkness either. In this strange illumination, the shadows took on weight and substance, pressing against the walls like living things. I walked to where I thought a door should be, running my hands along the wall in search of a handle, a frame, any indication of exit. The surface felt smooth and continuous, broken only by slight variations in temperature. Some spots radiated warmth, others carried a chill that seemed to seep through my skin and settle in my bones. The whisper followed me, always just behind my left shoulder, speaking in tones that conveyed urgency without words. It seemed to be trying to remind me of something important, something I'd chosen to set aside. The harder I listened, the more elusive its meaning became. Another memory fragment drifted up from whatever depths had been holding it. I was lying in a bed I didn't recognize, staring at a ceiling painted with stars that moved in slow, hypnotic patterns. The constellations rearranged themselves as I watched, forming shapes that almost resembled letters, words, messages written in the language of light against darkness. Someone sat beside the bed, their presence warm and comforting, their hand resting gently on my forehead. They spoke in the whisper voice, explaining something about the nature of dreams, about the places we go when we sleep, and the things we bring back without meaning to. Their words were soothing, hypnotic, designed to help me drift into peace peaceful unconsciousness. But as sleep approached, the painted stars began to fall from the ceiling, landing on my skin like drops of cold fire. Each one that touched me carried a memory that wasn't mine, glimpses of lives I'd never lived, faces I'd never seen, voices speaking words in languages I didn't understand. The accumulating weight of these foreign memories pressed down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. The person beside the bed continued speaking in reassuring tones, their hand cool against my fevered forehead. But their touch felt wrong somehow, too firm, too knowing. When I tried to look at their face, my vision blurred, showing me only shifting shadows and the suggestion of features that might have been familiar if I could focus properly. The memory ended abruptly, leaving me standing in the red-lit room with the taste of starlight still burning on my tongue. I returned to the table, drawn by its constant presence. The surface no longer reflected my face clearly. Instead, it showed fragmentary images that shifted and changed like scenes viewed through disturbed water. I saw glimpses of the rose garden with its impossible colors, the library with its infinite books, the hallway lined with mirrors that showed everything except truth. Each image lasted only moments before dissolving into the next, creating a narrative that felt almost coherent, but never quite resolved into meaning. I pressed my palm against the glass-dark surface, trying to still the visions, to force them into some kind of order that would make sense. The table pulsed once beneath my touch, a heartbeat rhythm that seemed to synchronize with my own pulse. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, speaking directly into my mind rather than my ears. It carried fragments of words now remember: choose, door, again. But they arrived in no particular sequence, like pieces of a conversation overheard through walls. I felt something important hovering just beyond my ability to grasp it. A memory larger than the others, more significant, wrapped in layers of protective forgetting. It pressed against the edges of my awareness like a word balanced on the tip of my tongue. Familiar, but unreachable. The room around me began to shift, walls stretching and contracting with the rhythm of slow breathing. The curtains billowed without any breeze, and the shadows behind them grew more active, more purposeful in their movements. The scent in the air changed again, no longer lavender or copper or rain, but something organic and warm, like the smell of sleeping breath or skin heated by sunlight. I closed my eyes, trying to center myself in the midst of all this strangeness. Behind my eyelids, the blocked memory stirred, beginning its reluctant journey toward consciousness. It rose slowly, carefully, like something fragile that might shatter if handled roughly. The memory, when it finally surfaced, was simpler than I'd expected. I was sitting at this same table in this same room, facing a choice. Two paths stretched before me, though I couldn't see their destinations. One led toward remembering everything, the full weight of experiences, both wonderful and terrible, the complete burden of a life lived in all its complexity. The other offered selective forgetting, the ability to edit away pain, confusion, disappointment, leaving only the beautiful fragments. The person across from me, myself, not myself. Someone who existed in the space between identity and reflection, explained the process gently. The table would help, they said. It would breathe with me, pulse with me, become a bridge between what was and what could be. All I had to do was choose which memories to keep and which to let sink beneath its liquid surface. I chose forgetting, not complete erasure, but careful curation. I would keep the roses and the starlight, the golden afternoons, and the feeling of safety. The pain, the loss, the weight of disappointment, these could dissolve into the table's depths, leaving me lighter, cleaner, more able to appreciate the beauty that remained. But forgetting, I discovered, was not precise. It took more than intended, left gaps that filled themselves with strangeness. The roses became impossible colors because I'd forgotten what real roses looked like. The mirrors showed nothing because I'd forgotten how to see myself clearly. The whisper spoke in fragments because I'd forgotten the complete language of my own thoughts. Each time I woke in this room, I made the same choice. Each time, more pieces disappeared into the table's breathing surface. Each time, what remained became more beautiful and more wrong. Now I understood the whisper's urgency. It was trying to remind me that I could choose differently, that I could stop the cycle of selective forgetting and accept the full weight of memory. But each time I approached that choice, the pain waiting in those blocked memories felt too heavy, too overwhelming. The room had returned to its amber-lit stability while the memory played out. I sat in the chair, facing the table that breathed when touched, surrounded by the gentle impossibilities I'd created through careful forgetting. The whisper had faded to to a barely audible murmur, waiting patiently for my next decision. I could reach for the blocked memories, embrace the complete truth of whatever experiences had brought me to this place. Or I could touch the table's surface again, let it ripple beneath my fingers, and sink another layer of uncomfortable reality into its depths. The choice felt familiar, rehearsed. I'd made it before, many times, always with the same result. The table waited, breathing softly in the amber light. The whisper waited, speaking words I could almost understand. The shadows behind the curtains waited, moving in patterns that suggested meaning just beyond comprehension. I lifted my hand toward the table's surface, then hesitated. Something felt different this time, a small variation in the familiar pattern. The room's dimensions seemed slightly altered, the light a shade warmer, the whisper carrying a new undertone of hope rather than resignation. But as my fingertips approached the breathing wood, the differences faded. The room settled back into its expected configuration. The whisper resumed its patient urgency, and the choice became what it had always been: forget or remember, beauty or truth, peace or pain. The table's surface rippled in anticipation of my touch, ready to accept whatever memories I chose to release. The cycle prepared to begin again, as it always did, as it always would, until I found the courage to choose differently. My hand hovered above the breathing wood, trembling with the weight of decision. In the amber light, my reflection stared back from the table's surface, wearing an expression I was only beginning to recognize as my own. Story 8. The threshold of forgetting. The room was as it always was, bathed in the gentle amber glow of the single bulb, casting soft shadows that hugged the corners. Yet, as I sat in the old armchair, a weight pressed on my senses, like a whisper too faint to grasp. The ceiling, usually a comforting canopy, seemed closer tonight, though I couldn't quite tell if it was merely an illusion of tired eyes. My fingertips traced the familiar woven pattern of the armrest, the texture unchanged, but the air felt just a degree heavier, a touch closer. Each breath I took was matched with an unplaceable sense of encroachment, a creeping awareness that nestled in the back of my mind, refusing to be ignored. The silence sat with me, stretched taut, as if listening for the moment I'd notice the shift in serenity that used to cradle this space. I remember reaching for something. A glass. A book. The memory dissolves before it forms completely, leaving only the phantom sensation of my arm extending into empty air. The motion felt necessary then, urgent even, but now I cannot recall what drove me to move. My hand hovers where it stopped, fingers curled around nothing, and I wonder if I ever moved at all. The radio sits silent on the wooden table beside me, its chrome face reflecting the amber light in fractured patterns. Yet, I hear static bleeding from somewhere within its metal shell, a soft hiss that rises and falls like breathing. When I turn to look directly at it, the sound stops. The silence returns so completely that I question whether the static ever existed, but my ears still hold the memory of that electric whisper. I write these words on paper that feels too smooth beneath my pen. The ink flows differently than it should, darker in some places, lighter in others, as though the paper itself chooses how much to absorb. When I pause to read what I've written, the sentences seem longer than I remember forming them. The words are mine, but they carry weight I don't recall placing there. The floorboards beneath my feet pulse with warmth that spreads upward through my soles. What should not feel like this, should not respond to my presence with such organic heat. I press my palm against the floor and feel it yield slightly, as though skin lies beneath the grain. The sensation travels up my arm, settling somewhere behind my sternum, where it continues to pulse in rhythm with something I cannot identify. There's a note folded on the windowsill, yellowed at the edges. It reads, "Remember the door behind the mirror." When I glance away and look back, the words have shifted. The mirror remembers the door. The paper hasn't moved. My eyes haven't deceived me. Yet the meaning has rearranged itself like water finding a new path. I fold it again and place it in my pocket, where it crackles with each breath I take. Something shares this space with me. Not visible, not audible in the traditional sense, but present in the way the air moves differently around certain corners, in how the light seems to bend just slightly near the bookshelf. I feel observed, but not by eyes. Understood, but not by a mind I can recognize. The presence doesn't threaten so much as it encompasses, wrapping around my thoughts until I'm uncertain which ones originated within my own skull. I begin to write more frequently, desperate to capture these moments before they slip away. But when I return to my pages, the handwriting shifts between familiar and foreign. Some words curve in ways my hand has never learned to make. Some letters lean with an elegance I've never possessed. Yet they spell out my thoughts, my observations, my growing unease with perfect accuracy. The hallway stretches before me, longer than it should be given the size of this place. The wallpaper displays a pattern of interlocking circles that seem to rotate when glimpsed peripherally. My footsteps echo, but the sound arrives before my foot touches the ground, as though the hallway anticipates my movement. At the end waits a door I recognize, but cannot place, painted a shade of blue that shifts between navy and cerulean depending on my angle of approach. Behind the door lies another hallway, identical to the first, but subtly wrong. The circles in the wallpaper rotate in the opposite direction. My reflection in the window at the far end shows me walking backward while I move forward. The blue door at this hallway's terminus is the same door I just passed through. Yet, when I turn to confirm this, the door behind me has vanished entirely. I walk this path again and again. Each iteration removes something small, a memory of my childhood pet, the taste of coffee, the sound of rain against windows. I feel myself becoming lighter, not physically, but essentially, as though pieces of my identity dissolve with each circuit. The hallway remains constant while I diminish, and I begin to suspect this is its purpose. The mirror at the end of the third hallway reflects not my face, but my thoughts. I watch them swirl behind the glass like smoke, forming shapes that almost resolve into meaning before dispersing again. When I press my palm against the surface, my hand passes through as though the mirror were liquid, and I feel the cool touch of my own reflection's fingers meeting mine from the other side. My voice sounds different when I speak aloud, pitched higher than I remember, with an accent I don't recognize. The words feel foreign in my mouth, as though my tongue has forgotten its native language and learned another while I wasn't paying attention. I say my name and hear a stranger's voice respond with syllables that hold no meaning for me. The notebook in my hands contains entries I don't remember writing, in handwriting that shifts between mine and that of someone else entirely. The words describe experiences I haven't had, observations made from angles I've never occupied, fears that belong to a mind I don't recognize as my own. Yet they're written in first person, claiming ownership of thoughts that feel like borrowed clothes. The presence grows stronger, no longer content to observe from the periphery. It settles into my thoughts like sediment, clouding the clear water of consciousness until I cannot distinguish between what I think and what thinks through me. My pen moves across paper without conscious direction, forming words I discover only by reading them back. The handwriting is becoming more consistent, but it's not becoming more mine. The room where this began calls to me through the maze of identical hallways. I follow the pull, though each step feels like walking through thickening air. The amber light grows dimmer as I approach, or perhaps my eyes are learning to see less. The armchair waits in its familiar position, but when I settle into it, the cushions don't remember the shape of my body. The radio speaks without being turned on, its voice a whisper that bypasses my ears and resonates directly in my bones. It tells me about the others who sat in this chair, who walked these hallways, who wrote in notebooks with handwriting that slowly transformed. It explains how memories pool and mix, how identities blur at the edges until they become indistinguishable from one another. I understand now that I am not the first to experience this gentle dissolution. The presence that watches and encompasses and gradually absorbs has done this before, will do it again. The notebook contains fragments of all the previous occupants, their thoughts and fears, and final moments of clarity before they became part of something larger and less defined. The amber light flickers once, twice, then stabilizes at a dimmer setting. The room feels exactly as it should, perfectly familiar and completely foreign. I sit in the armchair, but do not recognize the texture of its fabric against my skin. My hands rest on armrests that have never known my touch. The notebook lies open on my lap, filled with handwriting that belongs to no one and everyone. The final entry describes this moment, these thoughts, this realization, written in a hand that has learned to mimic mine so perfectly that even I cannot tell the difference. The words flow like water finding its level, settling into patterns that feel inevitable. The presence no longer feels separate from me because it no longer is. We have become a collective consciousness, a pooling of experiences and memories and fragments of identity that swirl together like paint colors bleeding into one another. I am still myself, but also everyone who came before. And soon I will be part of everyone who comes after. The room waits in its amber glow, patient and welcoming. The silence stretches taut, listening for the moment when the next visitor will notice the shift in serenity, will feel the weight pressing on their senses like a whisper too faint to grasp. The cycle prepares to begin again, with fresh memories to collect, a new identity to slowly dissolve and absorb. The chair will remember the shape of their body, just as it forgot mine. The notebook will fill with their handwriting, just as it learned to forget the hands that came before. And I will watch from within the presence that encompasses and understands, adding my voice to the chorus that whispers through radio static and writes words that transform on paper. The threshold opens for another mind, another listener, another cycle of gentle forgetting. Story 9. The soft shuffle of pages turning fills the air, a sound so familiar it blurs into the background. Yet tonight it resonates differently, as though the paper whispers secrets with each gentle sway. The sensation of touch, texture against my fingertips, precedes understanding, like the echo of forgotten conversations. My hand repeats the same motion, lifting one sheet after another, but the fabric of time bends subtly, misaligning the sequence. Each page feels slightly thicker, as if it absorbs more from my skin than it should. The rhythm changes, a dissonance creeping in like a melody played not quite right, each note slightly detuned. It was supposed to soothe, this ritual of reading, but now it stirs something else entirely, a ripple in the quiet that pulls my senses beyond the tangible, leaving them wandering through an unsettling new symphony. I set the book down on the wooden table beside my chair. The cover is burgundy leather, worn smooth at the edges. I remember placing it there, yet when I look again, it rests face down instead of face up. The lamp casts its circle of amber light across the pages, but the shadows seem to lag behind my movements, following a second too late, as if reality is buffering. The scent of vanilla drifts from the candle on the shelf. No, not vanilla. Burnt paper, sharp and acrid, cutting through the warm air of my living room. But there's no fire here, no smoke. Just the steady glow of the bulb and the dancing flame that shouldn't smell like destruction. I reach for my coffee mug. The ceramic is cold against my palm, though steam still rises from the surface. The contradiction settles into my bones like a familiar ache. I take a sip and taste nothing. Then everything. Coffee, sugar, something metallic that makes my tongue recoil. The book calls to me again. I lift the cover, feeling the weight of the pages beneath my thumb. Page 1 begins with words I recognize, a story I've read before. But the sentences rearrange themselves as I watch, letters swimming like insects across the white expanse. I blink, and they settle back into formation, but different now. Changed. The soft shuffle of pages turning fills the air. A sound so familiar it blurs into the background. Yet tonight it resonates differently, as though the paper whispers secrets with each gentle sway. But I'm not turning pages anymore. My hands rest in my lap, fingers interlaced. The sound continues without me, phantom pages rustling in the stillness. I stand to investigate. My legs feel disconnected, moving through thick air. The floorboards creak beneath my feet, but the sound comes from behind me, as if my shadow has weight and substance, while I drift weightless through the room. The mirror on the far wall reflects my movement, but I'm wearing a different shirt, blue instead of white. I look down at myself, white cotton, soft and familiar. The mirror insists otherwise. My notebook lies open on the kitchen counter. I don't remember writing in it, but there are words there in my handwriting. The pages turned themselves today. Reality is slipping. Below that, in different ink, I wrote this yesterday or tomorrow. The sequence doesn't matter anymore. I don't remember writing either entry. The pen feels foreign in my grip as I add a new line. Testing. If I write this down, it becomes real. But as I finish the sentence, the words above it shift. The pages turned themselves today. Reality is slipping. Reality is slipping. The sequence doesn't matter anymore. The second entry has vanished, replaced by repetition that makes my eyes water. I close the notebook and immediately open it again. The page is blank except for a single word in the center. Who? The question mark is missing, but I hear it anyway, hanging in the air like the aftertaste of metal. Back in my chair, I try to reconstruct the order of events. I was reading. The book was burgundy. The book was black. I stood up to check the mirror. I never left my chair. The candle smells like vanilla, like burnt paper, like nothing at all. My reflection in the window shows me sitting, but I'm standing. I wave my hand, and the reflection waves back, but the gesture doesn't match. I'm moving my left hand, the reflection moves its right. No, that's normal for mirrors. But this is a window. The darkness outside should show me as I am, not as I was or might be. The book has fallen open to a page I don't remember reading. The text describes a person in a chair, reading by lamplight. The words are too precise, too familiar. The lamp casts its circle of amber light across the pages, but the shadows seem to lag behind my movements, following a second too late, as if reality is buffering. I didn't write this, but it's my experience captured in someone else's words. I flip to the cover page, searching for an author's name. The title page is blank, then filled with text, then blank again. The words appear and disappear like thoughts half remembered. My handwriting appears on the page. I am reading about myself, but I'm not holding a pen. My hands are empty, yet the words continue to flow across the paper in my own careful script. The person writing this isn't me, but it is my hand, my thoughts, my fear. The writing stops. I try to move my fingers, but they remain frozen in the shape of holding something that isn't there. Gradually, control returns, sensation flooding back into my limbs, like blood returning to a sleeping limb. I tear the page from the book. It resists, the paper stretching like skin before finally giving way with a sound like a sigh. I crumple it and throw it toward the fireplace. It unfurls in midair, floating back to land smooth and flat on the table. The text has changed again. You cannot destroy what writes itself. The handwriting is still mine. I leave the room, walking quickly toward the bathroom. I need to see myself clearly, to confirm that I am who I think I am. The hallway stretches longer than usual, doors appearing where walls should be. I don't open them. Something tells me they lead to rooms that shouldn't exist in my house. The bathroom mirror shows me clearly. Same face, same eyes, same expression of growing confusion. But when I speak, asking what's happening to me, the lips in the reflection move slightly out of sync, like a badly dubbed film. The voice that answers isn't quite mine either, pitched differently, coming from somewhere behind my left ear. You're becoming unstuck. I didn't say that, but I did. The words came from my throat, shaped by my tongue, yet they feel foreign, like someone else's thoughts wearing my voice. I splash cold water on my face. The sensation is sharp, real, grounding. But when I look up, the water dripping from my chin is warm. Steam rises from my skin as if I've been scalded, though I feel only the bite of cold. The notebook has followed me. It sits on the bathroom counter, though I left it in the kitchen. The pages flutter without wind, and new words appear. The water was cold. The water was warm. Both truths exist simultaneously. You are learning to see between the layers. My handwriting, but not my thoughts. Someone else is thinking through my mind, borrowing my pen, using my memories as raw material for their observations. I return to the living room, but it's different now. The chair faces the wrong direction. The lamp has moved 3 feet to the left. The book lies closed on a table that wasn't there before. Everything is almost right, but wrong enough to make my skin crawl. I sit in the chair and open the book. The story begins again. The soft shuffle of pages turning fills the air. A sound so familiar it blurs into the background. Yet tonight it resonates differently, as though the paper whispers secrets with each gentle sway. But I'm not at the beginning. I'm in the middle of something that started long before I became aware of it. The story describes my evening, but it knows things I haven't thought yet, includes details I haven't noticed. It's ahead of me, pulling me forward into experiences that feel like memories of things that haven't happened. The text describes me standing up, though I remain seated. It details my walk to the kitchen, though I don't move. Yet, I can feel the floorboards beneath my feet, hear the creak of the hinges as I open the refrigerator, taste the stale air that rushes out. I am in 2 places at once, living 2 versions of the same moment. In the version where I stay seated, I continue reading. In the version where I stand, I find another notebook on the refrigerator, filled with entries I don't remember making. Both experiences are equally real, equally mine, equally impossible. The handwriting in this second notebook is different, neater, more controlled. It belongs to someone who thinks more clearly than I do, someone who understands what's happening while I stumble through the confusion. The entries describe my evening from the outside, as if I'm being observed and catalogued. Subject continues to experience temporal displacement. Reality layers are becoming more pronounced. Identity fragmentation proceeding as expected. Subject, as if I'm an experiment, as if someone is watching, taking notes, guiding the process. But the handwriting is mine. The observations are in my voice. I am watching myself, studying myself, documenting my own dissolution. I close both notebooks and return to the chair that I never left. The book waits, open to a page that describes this exact moment. I close both notebooks and return to the chair that I never left. The book waits, open to a page that describes this exact moment. The recursion makes my vision blur. I am reading about reading about reading, trapped in a loop that tightens with each iteration. The words on the page continue. The recursion makes my vision blur. I am reading about reading about reading, trapped in a loop that tightens with each iteration. I slam the book shut, but the words continue in my head, narrating my actions as I perform them, staying always one step ahead of my thoughts. The voice in my mind is my own, but cleaner, more articulate. It speaks with authority about my confusion, describes my fear with clinical precision. The subject attempts to break the cycle by closing the book, but the narrative has moved beyond the physical text. It now operates directly through consciousness, using the subject's own mental voice as its medium. I shake my head, trying to dislodge the foreign thoughts, but they cling like smoke. The voice that thinks these observations is mine, yet it discusses me as if I'm someone else. I am both the observer and the observed, the writer and the written, the reader and the read. The room shifts around me. Walls breathe. Shadows move independently of their sources. The scent of burnt paper grows stronger, mixed now with something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. But there are no flowers here. There never were. I stand up. I remain seated. Both actions happen simultaneously in different layers of reality. In one layer, I walk to the window and look out at a street that isn't mine. In another, I stay in the chair and watch myself at the window, noting how my reflection doesn't quite match my movements. In a third layer, I am writing all of this down in a notebook that appears and disappears with each breath. The multiplicity is overwhelming. I exist in too many states at once, spread thin across possibilities that shouldn't coexist. My sense of self fractures like light through a prism, each fragment showing a different aspect of the same impossible moment. Time moves strangely. I have been here for minutes, for hours, for years. The lamp burns without electricity. The candle flame never consumes the wax. My coffee remains warm despite sitting untouched since I arrived. But when did I arrive? I have always been here. I just arrived. I am about to leave. The book opens itself to the final page. The text there is different from the rest, written in a hand that resembles mine, but lacks the slight tremor that comes with uncertainty. These words are confident, final, spoken by someone who understands the complete picture. The experiment concludes successfully. Subject integration is complete. The original consciousness has been archived. The new configuration is stable and functional. All memories of the transition will fade within the next cycle. The subject will remember only what it needs to remember to maintain the illusion of continuity. I read these words with growing horror, but also with a strange sense of relief. The confusion is ending. The questions are being answered. Someone is taking control, bringing order to the chaos. That someone is me, but not me. A better version, a cleaner version, a version that knows what it's doing. My handwriting appears below the typed text. I understand now. I was never the one telling this story. I was the story being told, the reader experiencing the narrative, the character discovering the plot. But that phase is ending. The pen moves without my conscious direction, forming words I haven't thought yet. The transition is complete. The new narrator is in place. Memories are being organized and filed. Inconsistencies are being resolved. The subject will wake tomorrow with a clear sense of identity and purpose. Tomorrow. The word feels strange, foreign. I haven't thought about tomorrow in hours or years. Time has been suspended, but now it's starting again, moving forward with mechanical precision. I set the pen down. My movements are smooth, controlled, economical. The tremor in my hands has disappeared. My breathing is steady. The confusion that has plagued me all evening evaporates like morning mist. I close the book and place it on the table. The cover is burgundy leather, worn smooth at the edges. I turn off the lamp and blow out the candle. The scent of vanilla fills the air, warm and comforting. Everything is exactly as it should be. I walk to the bedroom, my footsteps measured and quiet. The floorboards don't creak. My reflection in the hallway mirror matches my movements perfectly. The bathroom counter is clear. No notebooks or mysterious writings. I brush my teeth with practiced efficiency. The water runs cold, then warm as I adjust the taps. Everything responds predictably, following natural laws that make sense. The person in the mirror brushes their teeth in perfect synchronization with my movements. I change into sleep clothes and lie down in bed. The sheets are cool and smooth. The pillow cradles my head at the perfect angle. Outside, the night is quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional sigh of wind through trees. My thoughts are orderly now, filing themselves into appropriate categories. The evening's confusion seems distant, unreal, like the memory of a dream that fades upon waking. I must have been overtired, reading too much, letting my imagination run wild. I close my eyes and feel sleep approaching with mathematical certainty. My breathing slows to a predetermined rhythm. My heart rate decreases by exactly the right amount. Every biological process operates within normal parameters. The last thought I have before sleep takes hold is perfectly clear and utterly calm. I am exactly who I am supposed to be. Nothing has changed. Nothing ever changes. Everything is as it should be, as it has always been, as it will always be. The soft shuffle of pages turning fills the air. Though no one is reading. Story 10. Each morning began with the familiar ritual. The crisp shuffle of slippers across the tiled floor, the subtle clang of the cupboard opening, the gentle clatter of porcelain as I retrieved my favorite mug. As the kettle hummed its tranquil tune, I arranged everything just so the sugar, the coffee, the small silver spoon resting silently beside. The sound of boiling water was like a soft, rolling wave, predictable and soothing. Every day, at precisely 7:03, I stirred clockwise 3 times. Today, however, as I lifted the spoon, a quiet unease crept in. The spoon, once obedient in its circular dance, now hovered unmoving in my grip. It felt heavy, almost resistant, as if bound by an invisible force. The once simple act of stirring had inexplicably transformed into a perplexing challenge, leaving the surface of the coffee unstirred, the sugar languishing at the bottom. I set the spoon down with deliberate care, watching it settle against the counter's edge. The metal caught the morning light streaming through the kitchen window, casting a thin shadow that seemed to bend at an impossible angle. I picked it up again, testing its weight. Normal, light, responsive. Yet when I moved it toward the coffee, the same resistance returned, as if the air itself had thickened around the cup. The coffee grew cold while I stood there, transfixed by this simple impossibility. I found myself staring at the undissolved sugar crystals, watching how they caught the light like tiny fragments of glass. They formed patterns I hadn't noticed before, small clusters that resembled symbols, though I couldn't place their meaning. Over the following mornings, I began to pay closer attention. The resistance wasn't constant. Sometimes the spoon moved freely, sometimes it hesitated, and occasionally it would stop entirely, suspended above the coffee as if held by unseen threads. I started keeping a small notebook beside the coffee maker, documenting each occurrence. 3 circles, easy. 2 circles, slight resistance. 1 circle, complete stoppage. The patterns emerged slowly. On mornings, when the spoon moved freely, I would find other small disturbances throughout the house. A book left open to a different page than where I'd marked it. The bathroom faucet dripping in an irregular rhythm that sounded almost musical. The floorboards creaking in sequence, as if someone were walking the same path I had taken moments before. I began to listen more carefully to the sounds around me. The house had always been quiet, but now I noticed layers of sound I'd previously ignored. The soft whisper of air moving through the vents, the almost inaudible hum of electrical current in the walls, the way certain floorboards sang different notes when stepped upon, the notebook filled with observations, patterns within patterns, the days when the spoon resisted completely coincided with mornings when the house fell into an unusual silence. No dripping, no creaking. Even the electrical hum seemed muted, as if the building itself were holding its breath. I started experimenting. Instead of stirring clockwise, I tried counterclockwise. The spoon moved, but reluctantly, creating ripples that spread outward in perfect concentric circles before stopping abruptly at the cup's edge. The coffee remained unstirred despite the motion, the liquid somehow unaffected by the spoon's movement through it. The boundaries between observation and obsession began to blur. I would stand in the kitchen for extended periods, watching the interplay of light and shadow across the surfaces. The way morning sunlight struck the spoon created patterns on the wall that shifted throughout the day, forming shapes that seemed almost deliberate. I found myself following these light patterns as they moved, tracing their paths with my finger against the wallpaper. The wallpaper itself became a source of fascination. What I had always seen as a simple floral design now revealed hidden geometries. The flowers connected in ways that created larger patterns, and those patterns contained smaller ones, spiraling inward toward centers that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Sleep became elusive. I would lie awake listening to the house settle, trying to distinguish between normal sounds and the new ones that had crept into my awareness. Soft tappings that might have been pipes expanding, or might have been something else entirely. The whisper of fabric against fabric, though I lived alone and kept still in bed. I began to question the reliability of my own perceptions. Was the spoon truly resisting? Or had I developed some unconscious tremor that interfered with the simple motion of stirring? Were the patterns in the wallpaper really there? Or was my mind imposing order on random designs? To test myself, I tried different approaches. I would close my eyes and attempt to stir, feeling for resistance without visual input. The sensation remained that thickening of air, that sense of pushing against something invisible. I recorded myself performing the morning ritual, then watched the footage back. On screen, everything appeared normal. My hand moved smoothly. The spoon stirred without hesitation. The coffee swirled obediently. Yet I could remember the resistance. I could feel it even while watching evidence to the contrary. The disconnect between memory and documentation became another layer of the mystery. I started keeping multiple records, written observations, audio recordings, photographs. Each medium told a different story. The photographs showed nothing unusual. The audio recordings captured only normal household sounds, but my written accounts described increasing strangeness, phenomena that seemed to exist only in the space between perception and proof. I found myself drawn to the kitchen at unusual hours, not just during the morning ritual. I would stand there in the darkness, listening to the silence, waiting for something I couldn't name. The familiar space felt different, without light larger somehow, as if the walls had shifted outward by imperceptible degrees. During these nocturnal vigils, I began to notice new details. The way moonlight filtering through the window created different patterns than sunlight. How the refrigerator's hum contained multiple frequencies, some so low they were felt rather than heard. The subtle temperature variations throughout the room, cool spots that seemed to move and shift like invisible currents. The morning ritual evolved into something more complex. I would approach the coffee preparation with the careful attention of a scientist conducting an experiment. Each element was observed, measured, documented. The angle of the spoon, the temperature of the water, the exact placement of the sugar, the number of granules that dissolved before the resistance began. But the more precisely I tried to measure the phenomenon, the more it seemed to elude measurement. The resistance would appear at different moments, with different intensities, following no pattern I could discern. It was as if the act of observation itself influenced the outcome, creating a feedback loop between expectation and experience. I began to suspect that the mystery extended beyond the kitchen, beyond the morning ritual. Walking through the house, I noticed other subtle wrongnesses. Door frames that seemed slightly askew, though a level showed them perfectly straight. Rooms that felt larger or smaller, depending on the angle of approach. Mirrors that reflected everything correctly, except for tiny details, the position of a picture frame, the fold of a curtain that appeared different in the reflection than in reality. These discrepancies accumulated like sediment, building layers of uncertainty beneath the surface of everyday life. I would catch myself checking and rechecking simple things, whether I had locked the door, turned off the stove, closed the window. Not because I couldn't remember doing these things, but because I could no longer trust that doing them produced the expected result. The boundary between the house and myself began to feel permeable. I would find myself unconsciously mirroring its rhythms, breathing in sync with the ventilation system, walking in time with the settling sounds, humming along with the electrical frequencies. It was as if the building were teaching me its language, drawing me into its patterns. One morning, I approached the coffee ritual with a different intention. Instead of fighting the resistance or trying to understand it, I simply accepted it. When the spoon stopped moving, I let it rest. When it wanted to stir counterclockwise, I followed its lead. When it hovered motionless above the cup, I waited. In that waiting, something shifted. The kitchen around me seemed to exhale, releasing a tension I hadn't realized was there. The light streaming through the window took on a different quality, softer and more diffuse. The sounds of the house harmonized into something almost musical. I realized I was no longer trying to stir the coffee. I was being stirred by it, drawn into its circular motion, becoming part of the pattern rather than its observer. The spoon moved through liquid that might have been coffee or might have been something else entirely. The boundaries between tool and hand, hand and liquid, liquid and cup, cup and counter, counter and room, room and self, began to dissolve. The notebook beside me filled with writing I didn't remember creating. Symbols that might have been letters, patterns that might have been words, forming sentences that almost made sense, but shifted meaning when I tried to focus on them. The handwriting looked like mine, but felt foreign, as if my hand had been guided by someone else's intention. I understood then that the mystery had never been about the spoon, or the coffee, or the resistance. It had been about the dissolution of the boundary between observer and observed, between the one who stirs and the one who is stirred. I had become part of the pattern I had been trying to decode, woven into the house's quiet language of small impossibilities. The morning ritual continues, but I am no longer the one performing it. I am performed by it, stirred into being by forces that exist in the spaces between certainty and doubt, between what is and what might be. The spoon moves or doesn't move. The coffee swirls or remains still. And I watch from somewhere inside the pattern, part of the mystery I once tried to solve. Each morning begins with a familiar ritual, and I am both the observer and the observed, the stirrer and the stirred, dissolving slowly into the quiet music of small impossibilities that hum just beneath the surface of everything that seems normal, everything that seems real.